Okay, so, we all do it. We put stuff off,
Oh,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Procrastination, it gets us all.
But this time, we're diving deep. We're tackling this beast head on thanks to procrastination. This book, it's not just about understanding why we procrastinate, which I think is super interesting. It's about actually giving you the tools to, kick it to the curb.
Yeah, and what I think is really fascinating is that the book jumps right into the neuroscience of it. Like it explains this whole battle that's going on in our brains, right? Between our prefrontal cortex, the planner, and our limbic system, which is all about that instant gratification.
Ooh, I love that. It's like this constant struggle between the responsible angel on one shoulder
Right.
and like the little devil who just wants to, have fun on the other.
Exactly.
No wonder it's so hard to resist like that just one more episode when you've got a deadline breathing down your neck.
Oh, tell me about it. It's all about that immediate reward. But for us creative types, it can get even trickier, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, yeah.
Because it often ties into things like fear of failure,
Hmm.
perfectionism, these like deep-seated things that can become major roadblocks.
Speaking of roadblocks, Procrastination Nation, it lays out these 5 key triggers that send us spiraling into procrastination mode. And you know what? I think just recognizing your own personal trigger, that's the first step to breaking free. So they range from feeling overwhelmed to just plain boredom. But the two that really I think resonate with artists, writers, designers are fear of failure
Oh, yeah, big time.
and perfectionism.
Yeah, those are huge, especially when your work is out there for everyone to judge. But the thing is, and this is what the book does so well, understanding your trigger. It's like having this secret weapon.
Right.
Like once you know what sets you off, you can actually start to, create strategies to deal with it.
Okay, so I'm all about strategies, especially if they're brain hack strategies. So let's talk tactics. Procrastination Nation, it gives us some good ones. And these aren't just theories, these are things you can use right now. One that caught my eye, it's called the 5-minute rule. It sounds almost too simple.
It does, but there's a really cool neuroscience behind it. You see, committing to just 5 minutes of work, especially on something you've been putting off, it tricks your brain, specifically a part called the basal ganglia. And that's the area that's all about habit formation. So you're basically rewiring your brain to see starting as less of a threat.
Okay, for someone like me who tends to get totally overwhelmed by big projects, that's huge. It's like that whole journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step kind of thing. But what if even 5 minutes feels impossible?
Well, the book has a solution for that too. It's called the 2-minute rule, which is basically shrinking the task down to something ridiculously easy. So instead of, I have to write this whole article, I'm just going to open the document and write one sentence.
It's like tricking yourself into taking action.
Right.
And then often, the momentum takes over.
It's all about lowering that initial resistance. And there's this other technique that I personally find super helpful, especially for things I really dread. And it's called temptation bundling.
Oh, tell me more about that one. I'm always looking for ways to make the less than thrilling things more appealing.
Well, it's basically pairing something you enjoy with something you need to do. So let's say, I don't know, you love listening to podcasts, but you absolutely hate answering emails. Well, you only allow yourself to listen to your favorite podcast while answering those emails.
Genius. It's like positive reinforcement for grown-ups. I can see how this would work for so many things, especially creative tasks. Imagine you're a designer who loves exploring new fonts,
Mm-hmm.
but you hate doing client paperwork. You could allow yourself to browse those font websites only while you're tackling invoices.
There you go. And the reason these seemingly simple tricks are so effective is because they actually tap into our brain's reward system. You're essentially rewiring your brain to associate these dreaded tasks with something pleasurable. But Procrastination Nation, it doesn't just stop at quick fixes.
Right.
It goes deeper. It explores how to build lasting habits for long-term creative goals.
That's what I'm talking about. I mean, quick fixes are great to get us going, but I'm all about that sustainable creative energy, the kind that doesn't fizzle out after a week.
Well, one of the key concepts in the book is the never zero rule. It sounds simple, but it's powerful. The idea is to commit to doing something, anything, related to your goal every single day, even if it's just for a few minutes.
So, even if I just write one sentence of that novel I've been putting off,
Uh-huh.
or, do one quick sketch for a design project, that still counts.
Absolutely. You're avoiding those long breaks that make it so hard to get back into the groove. And even more importantly, you're reinforcing the identity of someone who creates consistently.
So it's not just about checking things off a to-do list. It's about becoming the kind of person who just naturally incorporates these creative acts into their life. That's a cool shift in perspective.
And it actually ties into something else the book highlights, the link between procrastination and burnout. Even the most passionate creatives, we hit that wall sometimes.
Burnout is real, and it can hit anyone, especially those of us who push ourselves hard. The book actually breaks down some of the common causes, and it's things like constantly overworking without taking breaks, putting immense pressure on yourself to be perfect, feeling like you're stuck in a creative rut, or even just dealing with, those external pressures from clients or deadlines. Any of this sounds familiar.
I think most of us can relate to at least one of those, especially in the creative field. But the good news is, the book doesn't just diagnose the problem,
Right.
it offers solutions.
So what can we do about it? Like, how do we actually recover from burnout and, even better, prevent it in the first place?
Well, first and foremost, give yourself permission to take a break. I know, it sounds counterintuitive when you've got a million things on your plate, but rest is not a luxury. It's essential. It's like recharging your batteries.
And it doesn't have to be some grand, like month-long retreat. The book talks about how even short breaks, just a few hours away from your usual routine, can make a huge difference.
Yeah, even small things. And those breaks should involve things completely unrelated to your work. Engage in like low-stakes creativity, just for the pure joy of it. When you're not focused on deadlines or outcomes, it can really reignite your passion.
So it's about remembering you're a human, not a creative machine.
Exactly.
Okay, but even when we're feeling refreshed and motivated, there's this other, like, major hurdle, distractions. And Procrastination Nation goes right at it. It's got some solid strategies for, like, mastering focus and beating those pesky distractions.
The book digs into this concept that our brains have these two modes, deep work mode and shallow work mode. Think of it this way. Deep work is like you're a sculptor, meticulously carving away at this masterpiece. Shallow work is like you're juggling rubber chickens. Lots of activity, but no real progress.
Oh, I love that analogy. And unfortunately, our modern world, with all its notifications and demands on our attention, it's basically designed to keep us in that rubber chicken juggling state.
It is. But we can train our brains to resist those distractions and access that coveted deep work state more easily. The book recommends some really practical strategies like turning off notifications, using website blockers, working in full screen mode, even creating a dedicated distraction-free workspace.
It's about taking control of your digital and physical space instead of letting it control you.
Right, you're designing your environment for focus. And once you've minimized those external distractions, the book offers some great techniques for actually training your brain for deeper focus. One that's really popular is the Pomodoro method. Have you ever tried that one?
I have. It's where you work in focused sprints, like 25 to 45 minutes,
Uh-huh.
followed by short breaks. I find it super helpful for like preventing burnout and staying concentrated. But I'll be honest, I've struggled with it too. Sometimes I get so into the flow, I don't want to stop for the break. And other times, even 25 minutes feels like forever.
Yeah, and that's really common. The key is to experiment and find what works best for you. Some people thrive on those longer sprints, while others need more frequent breaks. It's all about listening to your own rhythm. And the book also talks about the 10-minute rule, which I think is a great way to overcome that initial resistance. If you're really struggling to get started on something, just tell yourself, okay, I'm just going to work on this for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It makes it feel less daunting. And often, once you've overcome that initial inertia, you find yourself wanting to continue.
It's like once you get going, you're like, all right, I can do this. I also think creating a flow state ritual can be really powerful.
Oh, interesting.
Like it could be something as simple as, playing a specific playlist, lighting a candle, or even just like working at the same time every day.
Yeah, you're signaling to your brain it's focus time. You're creating a mental trigger to help you get into that zone more easily. And it's important to remember that focus isn't just about managing your time. It's about managing your energy.
Right.
We all have different peak creative hours. Some of us are morning people, others are night owls. The key is to figure out your own rhythm and, schedule your most important work for those times when you're naturally more focused and energized.
That's so true. It's like working with your brain instead of against it. But even with the best strategies in place, there's this major internal obstacle that can sabotage everything: self-doubt.
Oh, for sure. And Procrastination Nation, it tackles this head on, especially this phenomenon of imposter syndrome. That feeling like you're not good enough, that you're a fraud, that you're going to get exposed.
Ugh, imposter syndrome. I think almost every creative person has experienced that at some point. It's that voice that's like, you're not a real artist, a real writer, a real designer.
It's so debilitating, but the book has some powerful techniques for quieting that inner critic and creating with more confidence. And one of the most important things is simply recognizing that these negative thoughts are just that. They're just thoughts. They're not necessarily true.
It's about separating your work from your worth. Like a bad piece of work doesn't mean you are bad.
Exactly. The book encourages us to challenge those thoughts, to reframe them. So instead of saying, I'm not good enough, you might say, I'm learning and growing every day.
Right, right.
And instead of comparing yourself to others and feeling inadequate, focus on your own progress and celebrate your accomplishments, no matter how small.
And I think confidence often comes from action, not the other way around, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to wait until you feel confident to start creating. Just start creating and the confidence will follow.
It's a process, not a destination. And speaking of process, there's another fear that can really hold us back, especially when we're nearing the finish line of a project. The fear of completion.
It sounds counterintuitive, but I actually think it's easier to start something than it is to finish it. Why do you think that is?
Well, Procrastination Nation explores this, and one of the main culprits is perfectionism. We keep tweaking and refining, striving for that ideal, but perfection is this moving target. There's always something else we could improve.
It's that whole done is better than perfect philosophy, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes you just got to release it into the world, even if it's not 100% polished.
exactly. And we also avoid finishing things sometimes because we're afraid of judgment. What if people don't like it? What if it's not well received?
It's that vulnerability hangover all over again. Putting your work out there, it's scary. It's exposing yourself to potential criticism.
It is. But it's important to remember that the only way to truly fail is to never finish at all. As long as your work remains hidden, it can't have any impact.
So how do we push past that fear and actually cross the finish line?
Well, Procrastination Nation gives us several strategies, and one of the most effective is setting a hard deadline
Mm-hmm.
and sticking to it. It's amazing how much more productive we can be when we have a clear time constraint.
Deadlines, they can be our best friend or our worst enemy, depending on how we use them. The book also suggests creating a finishing ritual to signal to your brain it's time to wrap things up.
Oh, nice.
It could be something as simple as playing a certain playlist, changing your workspace, or even just setting a reward for yourself when you've completed the task.
Yeah, it's about creating that sense of closure and celebrating the accomplishment. And sometimes the best thing to do is just to release your work before you feel completely ready. We often get stuck in this cycle of endless editing and refining. But the truth is, we learn the most from putting our work out into the world and getting feedback.
So true. Sometimes we just got to let go of that need for control and trust that the work will find its way. So we've talked about the science of procrastination, the sugars, the strategies for getting started, the importance of finishing. What other gems does Procrastination Nation have for, building a procrastination-proof future?
Well, you hit on something really important. It's not about just overcoming procrastination in this one instance. It's about creating a life where it has less power over you. And the book dives into this, emphasizing that, it's an ongoing process, not a one-time fix.
So it's not about reaching some mythical state of perfect productivity where we never procrastinate again.
Right.
It's about building systems and habits that support our goals over the long haul.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful strategies is to keep projects small and manageable. Because you know what? When we feel overwhelmed, that's when procrastination creeps in. But if we break down big tasks into smaller, more achievable steps, it becomes a lot less daunting.
So instead of I'm going to write a whole novel this month, maybe it's okay, I'm going to do a chapter a week,
Uh-huh.
or even a few pages a day.
That's the idea. It's those small, consistent steps that add up over time. And the book also talks about the importance of scheduling creativity. If we only create when we feel inspired, we're probably going to be pretty inconsistent. It's way more effective to establish a regular creative routine, even if it's just for a short time each day.
So it's about making creativity a non-negotiable part of your day, not just something you squeeze in when you have time.
Right, exactly. And of course, we need to continue protecting our focus like a fortress,
Yeah.
using those distraction blocking strategies we talked about earlier. It's about creating that space, physically and mentally, where you can do your best work.
So declutter that desk, silence those notifications, create a sanctuary for your creativity. But it's not all work and focus, right? The book also talks about the importance of rest and play.
Oh, absolutely. Creativity thrives when we're feeling energized and refreshed, not burnt out and depleted.
Right.
Make time for activities that bring you joy. Allow your mind to wander. It's in our moments of relaxation that some of our best ideas come through.
So, schedule that walk in nature, that coffee date with a friend, that time to just sit and daydream.
Yes,
It's an investment.
it is.
But let's be realistic, procrastination, it's going to creep back in at some point.
Oh, for sure.
So, like, what do we do when that happens?
Well, Procrastination Nation gives this simple three-step plan for getting back on track. First, identify the problem. Are you feeling overwhelmed, afraid of failure, simply distracted? Once you understand the root cause, you can then choose the most effective strategy.
So, like, it's a procrastination diagnosis.
Exactly.
Figure out what's really going on before you try to fix it.
Then use that 5-minute rule to restart. Commit to working on the task for just 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That helps break down that initial resistance and often leads to longer stretches of focused work.
It's that little push to get the ball rolling.
Right. And finally, don't be afraid to seek accountability. Tell a friend what you're working on. Set a public headline. Join a creative community for support. Knowing that someone else is expecting you to show up can be really powerful.
It's like having a cheerleader in your corner. So Procrastination Nation, that's it in a nutshell. It's packed with these insights and practical strategies. But there's this one thing that really stood out to me as we were prepping for this deep dive, and I think it's super relevant for all of you listening. It kind of builds on what the book offers.
Intrigued.
Let's unpack it in part 2.
We've been talking about all these great tools and techniques from Procrastination Nation, but what really struck me is that the book focuses a lot on like individual actions
Yeah.
and mindset shifts. And I think we can take that even further. Like sometimes our surroundings can actually be contributing to our procrastination.
Oh, 100%. It's like trying to meditate in the middle of a rock concert. Your environment, it makes a huge difference. I know, I've definitely noticed, like, when my workspace is cluttered,
Uh-huh.
my mind feels cluttered. It's like almost impossible to focus.
It's not just the physical clutter either, right?
Right.
Our digital environment can be a major trigger. You think about those constant notifications popping up on your phone,
Oh, yeah?
that overflowing inbox, the endless scroll of social media. It's like our devices are designed to keep us distracted.
It's like we're living in this world of digital rubber chickens. So how do we create environments that actually support our focus and minimize those triggers?
Well, I think the first step is awareness. Take a look around your workspace, both physical and digital, and ask yourself, what's contributing to my procrastination? Is it the piles of papers on my desk? Is it the, tempting tabs open in my browser? The constant dinging of my phone?
It's like doing a procrastination audit
Yes.
of your surroundings. So once you've identified the culprits, then what?
Then it's about taking action, and it doesn't have to be this huge overhaul. Just start with small, incremental changes that feel good and sustainable. Maybe it's clearing off your desk each evening before you leave, or maybe it's creating a dedicated deep work zone, like a little corner of your house that is free from distractions. You could try setting boundaries around your technology use, like silencing those notifications or having specific times when you check email.
It's like being intentional
Yes.
about your digital space, like curating it just as thoughtfully as you would your physical space. And it's not about being a minimalist or having like this perfectly organized desk.
Right.
It's about, making choices that support your flow.
Exactly. And, our environment isn't just about our physical objects or digital distractions. It's also about the people we surround ourselves with.
Oh, that's huge.
They have a huge impact on our energy and our mindset.
I've definitely noticed that when I'm around people who are constantly complaining or gossiping, my own energy just drains. It's so hard to feel motivated and inspired.
Think of it this way. If you're trying to grow a beautiful garden, you wouldn't plant it in toxic soil. You need to nurture it with the right conditions. And it's the same with your creative life.
So instead of toxic soil, we need to surround ourselves with people who are like supportive,
Yeah.
inspiring, encouraging. It's about finding your tribe, your creative community.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding people who will cheer you on, right? It's also about finding people who will challenge you to grow, who will push you outside your comfort zone.
Yes.
Mentors, collaborators, even friendly rivals. They all play a role in shaping our journeys.
I love that. It's like having a team of creative gardeners helping you tend to your ideas. But it's also important to be mindful of those relationships that might be like drain your energy
Absolutely.
or undermining your confidence.
Yeah, sometimes we need to set boundaries with people who are constantly negative or critical, even if they're close friends or family members. And it's not about being unkind. It's about protecting your creative space.
It's like weeding your garden.
Yes.
Removing those elements that are hindering growth. sometimes I got to make those tough choices
You do.
to create a healthy environment for your creativity. And sometimes the most productive thing you can do is say no.
Yes.
We often feel obligated to say yes to every request, every invitation, every opportunity. But sometimes saying no is the ultimate act of self-care.
It is.
It's about prioritizing your goals and protecting your energy.
Absolutely.
Speaking of energy, we've talked a lot about the external environment. But what about our internal environment? Like our thoughts, our emotions, our beliefs, all that stuff.
That's such a good point. Our inner world can be just as influential as our outer world when it comes to procrastination. In fact, one of the most powerful things we can do is learn how to reframe our thoughts and beliefs about procrastination.
So instead of beating ourselves up for procrastinating, we can try to approach it with curiosity and
Yes,
compassion.
exactly. So instead of thinking, oh, I'm such a procrastinator, I'll never get anything done, we could say, okay, I'm noticing that I'm feeling resistant to starting this task. What's going on here?
Right.
What am I afraid of? What needs are not being met?
It's like turning procrastination into a teacher, like
Yes,
a guide that can help us understand ourselves better.
I love that.
And I think that ties into something else we touched on earlier, the link between procrastination and fear. We often put things off because we're afraid of something, whether it's failing, being judged, or even succeeding.
Oh, fear is a huge driver of procrastination. But the book doesn't just tell us to ignore our fears. It actually suggests that we can harness them, use them as fuel.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do we do that? How do we go from being paralyzed by fear to being propelled by it?
It starts by identifying the specific fear that's driving your procrastination. Get really clear about what you're afraid of. Is it the fear of your work not being good enough, the fear of criticism, the fear of what success might bring? And once you've identified the fear, you can start to examine it. Is this a rational fear
Yeah.
based on real evidence? Or is it an irrational fear based on limiting beliefs or past experiences?
It's like shining the light on it, bringing it out into the open.
Exactly. And once you've examined it, you can start to reframe it.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what if this fear is actually a sign that I'm on the right track? What if it means I'm pushing myself outside of my comfort zone, that I'm doing something truly meaningful?
Ooh, I love that. It's like turning that fear into a compass, guiding you towards your goals instead of holding you back.
Yes.
Can you give me an example of how this might work in real life?
Sure, let's say you're a musician,
Okay.
and you're procrastinating on recording your album, and you've identified that your fear is rooted in this belief that your music isn't good enough, that you'll be judged harshly by, critics and listeners.
Which is such a common fear for artists. It takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there.
It does. But instead of letting that fear paralyze you, what if you reframed it? What if you said to yourself, I'm so afraid of releasing this album because it's the most honest, vulnerable, and powerful music I've ever created. It's scary because it matters.
I love that. You're taking that fear and flipping it, turning it into a source of pride.
Exactly. And once you've reframed the fear, you can start to take action.
Right.
Book studio time, create a marketing plan, start sharing your music with friends and family for feedback. Suddenly, that fear, which was once a barrier, becomes the wind in your sails.
It's like you're taking that fear energy and transforming it into creative energy.
Yes.
And this reminds me of another challenge a lot of us face, that feeling of being stuck,
Oh, yeah.
like not knowing where to start or how to move forward with a project.
That's so common. And it's also linked to that fear of failure
Right.
or that feeling of being overwhelmed. We get so caught up in the what-ifs and the shoulds that we end up frozen.
So how do we break free from that stuck feeling and get those creative juices flowing again? Does Procrastination Nation have any advice?
It does. The book emphasizes tapping into your intrinsic motivation, remembering why you started creating in the first place. It's about reconnecting with that joy, that curiosity, that playfulness
Yeah.
that often gets lost.
So it's about remembering the fun part, not just focusing on the end product or external validation.
Exactly. And the book has some great tips for doing that. One is to simply make time for creative play. Experiment with new materials.
Mm-hmm.
Try a different art form. Do something just for the pure joy of it without any expectations or pressure to produce something good.
It's like giving yourself permission to be a beginner again,
Yes.
to explore without judgment.
And another tip is to surround yourself with inspiration.
Oh, yeah.
Visit museums, watch documentaries, read books, listen to music, have conversations with other creative people.
It's like feeding your creative soul with a nourishing buffet
It is.
of ideas and experiences. And sometimes the best way to get unstuck is to just change your environment.
Mhm.
Go for a walk in nature, work in a different coffee shop, even rearrange your furniture.
Oh, yeah, I love that. A change of scenery can do wonders.
Speaking of shifting perspective, one of the things that Procrastination Nation really hits on is the importance of cultivating a growth mindset. You know, that belief that our abilities are not fixed,
Right.
that they can be developed
Exactly.
through effort and learning.
Yeah, a growth mindset helps us embrace challenges, learn from our mistakes, and develop resilience in the face of setbacks. And the book has some great tips for cultivating this. One is to focus on the process, not just the outcome.
Right.
So celebrate your effort and your progress, not just the final product.
So instead of I'm a failure because I didn't finish that project on time, it's more like I'm proud of myself for putting in the effort and, learning from this experience.
Exactly. And another tip is to reframe negative self-talk.
Okay.
So instead saying, I'm not good at this, you might say, I'm still learning. I'm getting better every day.
It's like changing the script in your head from self-doubt to self-compassion. And I think that's so important, not just for overcoming procrastination, but just for living a more fulfilling and creative life.
Absolutely. When we cultivate a growth mindset, we open ourselves up to new possibilities. We become more resilient, and we develop a deeper sense of satisfaction in our work.
So we've covered a lot, from practical tips for creating a supportive environment
Right.
to reframing our fears to the importance of that inner motivation
Uh-huh.
and a growth mindset. What other wisdom does Procrastination Nation offer for those of us on this creative self-discovery journey?
Well, one of the things that really resonated with me was the emphasis on self-compassion. We often beat ourselves up for procrastinating, but the authors argue that this just makes the problem worse. It creates a cycle of shame and guilt that can actually lead to more procrastination.
It's like that saying, you can't hate yourself into a better version of yourself. So instead of being our own worst critic, we can try to be our own best friend.
Exactly. Self-compassion means treating ourselves with the same kindness, understanding, and support that we would offer to a good friend. It means acknowledging our struggles without judgment and recognizing that, you know what? We're all human. We all make mistakes. We're all doing the best we can with what we've got.
And I think that's especially important for us creative types who often put so much pressure on ourselves to be original and innovative and successful. It's easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves.
It is.
And criticizing ourselves.
It is. And the book offers some great tips for cultivating self-compassion. One is to simply notice when you're being harsh or critical towards yourself.
Right.
Pay attention to the language you're using in your head. Are you using words like stupid, lazy, worthless? If so, try to replace them with more compassionate language.
So instead of, I'm such an idiot for procrastinating on this, it's okay that I'm struggling with this. I'm human. I'm doing my best.
Exactly. And another tip is to practice mindfulness.
Okay.
Notice your thoughts and feelings without judgment. Observe them with curiosity, like you're watching clouds passing by.
It's about creating that space so we're not so caught up in our thoughts.
Exactly. And I think that ties into something else that's really important. Learning to forgive ourselves for our past procrastination.
Oh, yeah.
Holding on to guilt and shame from the past only weighs us down. It's like carrying around this heavy backpack full of regrets. The book encourages us to practice self-forgiveness. Let go of those burdens.
So instead of dwelling on all the things we should have done,
Right.
we can focus on the now and make choices that align with our values.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're always learning and growing, and every moment is a new opportunity to start fresh.
It's like hitting the reset button on your creative journey.
Yes.
And giving yourself permission to just move forward.
And that brings us to another important part of overcoming procrastination, the power of finishing. We talk a lot about getting started, but finishing is just as important, if not more so.
You're totally right. There's this magic that happens when you complete a project, like this sense of accomplishment and satisfaction that just fuels you up.
It's like closing the loop, completing the cycle. And the book has some great tips for pushing past those final hurdles and finally crossing the finish line. One is to set a hard deadline and stick to it.
Right.
We already talked about deadlines, but they're especially important when it comes to finishing.
It's like giving yourself that clear target,
Yes.
that finish line.
And the book also suggests creating a finishing ritual to signal to your brain it's time to wrap things up.
Okay.
Something as simple as, playing a specific playlist, changing your workspace, or setting a reward for yourself once you've completed the task.
It's about celebrating that accomplishment.
And sometimes, honestly, the best thing to do is just release your work before you feel completely ready. We often get stuck in that endless cycle of editing and refining, but we learn the most from actually putting our work out there and getting feedback.
It's about letting go of that need for perfection
Exactly.
and trusting that the work will find its people.
And, that brings us back to one of the core messages of Procrastination Nation. It's not about achieving some mythical state of perfect productivity.
Right.
It's about progress, not perfection. It's about showing up for yourself even when it's hard and celebrating those small wins.
Because every step, no matter how small, it's a victory.
It is.
So we've covered so much, from the science to the habits, creating a supportive environment,
Right.
self-compassion.
Mm.
What are some key takeaways that our listeners can use?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is understanding our own triggers. Once we know what sets us off, we can develop strategies to deal with it. And it's not about beating ourselves up.
Right.
It's about approaching it with curiosity and compassion.
It's like treating yourself as you would treat a friend.
Exactly. And another key takeaway is creating a supportive environment
Yes.
for our creative work. That includes both our physical and digital spaces and the people we surround ourselves with.
We got to create that space where we feel energized and supported.
And we need to remember that environment isn't just external, it's also internal, right?
Right.
It's our thoughts, it's our beliefs.
All that.
Cultivating a growth mindset and practicing self-compassion could make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And finally, I think it's important to remember that this is a journey.
Yes.
It's not a destination.
It's not about arriving.
There will be times we fall back into old habits, and that's okay. The key is to keep learning, keep growing, and just keep moving forward.
So true. And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's one final thought I want to leave you all with. Something to ponder.
Ooh, I love a good cliffhanger.
Let's dive into that in part 3. So we've been talking about taking responsibility for our procrastination, but I think there's another layer to this whole thing. Like, what about the role of systems?
You're so right. We often hear that procrastination is, a personal failing, like it's about willpower or discipline. But what if it's not always about us? What if it's the systems we're in that are kind of setting us up to fail?
It's like we're trying to run a race, but someone keeps moving the finish line. Think about it. Unrealistic deadlines, unclear expectations, this whole culture that glorifies being busy all the time, that can create a breeding ground for procrastination.
It's like swimming upstream, right?
Totally.
You might have all the right moves, but if the current's against you, it's going to be tough.
And it's not just work, it's other parts of life too. Like, think about education. Standardized tests, rigid curriculums that focus on memorizing stuff instead of, the actual understanding. That can kill creativity.
It's like we're trained to be good little rule followers, not to for ourselves.
Right. And then we wonder why we feel so burnt out. So how do we deal with these systems that seem to be like pro-procrastination?
That's the question, isn't it? I don't think there are easy answers, but being aware of it is a start, Once you see how these systems affect you, you can start to make different choices.
For sure. It might mean having tough conversations, pushing for change, setting boundaries, or even stepping away from systems that just don't work for you.
It's about taking charge, not just within the system, but in how you relate to it.
And you know what? Sometimes it might even mean building your own systems, like creating communities and support networks that encourage creativity and collaboration, not competition.
So it's not about pointing fingers, it's about seeing the bigger picture and figuring out how to either make it work for you or find a different path.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, it circles back to that self-compassion thing we talked about. We need to be kind to ourselves, especially when those systems make things harder.
It's like giving yourself a break. We're all just doing our best, right?
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into procrastination nation, I think the big takeaway is that procrastination is complicated. It's not just about us as individuals, it's also about the world around us.
It is.
And the more we understand that, the more compassion we have for ourselves and others, the more we can create a world where creativity thrives.
It's about reclaiming that power. So there you have it, listeners. We've gone deep, we've explored those hidden triggers, and we've given you some solid tools. But remember, this is a journey.
It's not the end, it's the beginning.
Exactly. Take what works for you, experiment, find your own way, and most importantly, you are not alone in this.
We're all in this together. So go out there, create something awesome, share your thoughts, your struggles, your victories with us in the comments. Can't wait to see what you do next.